At her wedding, my daughter called me staff. Her new family laughed at my clothes. I let them finish humiliating me, then quietly took the microphone and made one announcement, and their faces went pale. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The day of my daughter's wedding began not with joy but with a quiet, familiar ache of apprehension. I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom, looking at my reflection, and saw a woman I barely recognized, a guest in the narrative of her own child's life. My name is Esther Williams. At 62, I am a widow, a mother, and the sole and very quiet owner of a multi-million-dollar logistics and transport empire. My life's work began 40 years ago with a single second-hand flatbed truck, a mountain of debt, and a grit that the world had tried and failed to grind out of me. My late husband Joseph had been the dreamer. I had been the builder. Together we had turned that one truck into a fleet, that small office into a network of warehouses that spanned the country. Joseph had been gone for 10 years now, but the business, our legacy, had continued to thrive under my quiet, steady hand. I had made sacrifices. I had missed school plays for shipping manifests, and parent-teacher conferences for contract negotiations. But I had done it all for one reason: my daughter Ava. I had worked so that she would never have to. I had built an empire so that she could have a kingdom of her own, a life of opportunity and choice, a life free from the smell of diesel and the bone-deep weariness of a 17-hour workday. And she had taken that opportunity. She had gone to the best schools, had gotten a degree in public relations, and had carved out a successful career for herself. She was by all accounts a success, but in her relentless, desperate climb up the social ladder, she had come to see my world, the very world that had funded her ascent, not as a foundation but as a stain to be removed. Today was the pinnacle of her climb. She was marrying Tristan Sterling, the handsome, charming, and deeply condescending heir to the Sterling family's private equity fortune. It was a marriage that was less a union of hearts and more a strategic merger of brands. I looked at my dress in the mirror. It was not the kind of dress the other mothers at this wedding would be wearing. It was not a glittering diamond-encrusted confection from a famous designer. It was a simple but exquisitely made gown of deep emerald green silk. I had had it custom made by a small independent designer I admired. A young woman whose workshop reminded me of my own early days. The fabric was a testament to craftsmanship, the cut a study in understated elegance. It was a dress that was in its own quiet way a reflection of my own values. Quality over labels, substance over flash. I knew my daughter would hate it. I adjusted the simple, elegant pearl necklace that had been Joseph's last gift to me. My heart was full of a mother's pride, a deep primal joy at the thought of seeing my only child get married. But beneath it was a cold, hard knot of dread. I knew with a certainty that was as sharp and as painful as a shard of glass, that I was not just a guest at this wedding. I was a test, a final, embarrassing hurdle that my daughter had to overcome on her way to her perfect new life, and I had a terrible sinking feeling that it was a test we were all about to fail. The Sterling Grand Hotel was not just a venue, it was a statement. It was the city's most exclusive and historic hotel, a fortress of old money elegance and quiet, intimidating power. The wedding was being held in the Grand Ballroom, a magnificent space with soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and a guest list that read like a who's who of the city's financial elite. I arrived and was escorted, not to the main guest area, but up a private elevator to the bridal suite, a sprawling multi-room space with a panoramic view of the city. I found Ava in the center of a whirlwind of chaotic, high-strung energy. She was surrounded by a flock of bridesmaids, makeup artists, and hairdressers, all of them speaking in the hushed, reverent tones of courtiers attending a queen. Ava herself was a vision in white, her designer gown a magnificent architectural creation of silk and lace. But her face beneath the flawless makeup was a mask of pure, unadulterated stress. She was not a happy bride. She was a frantic director, terrified that her perfect production was about to be ruined by an unscripted moment. She saw me enter, and for a fraction of a second her professional hostess smile was in place. "Mom," she said, her voice a little too bright. Then her eyes swept over me, from my simple, elegant dress to my modest pearl necklace, and her smile faltered, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated and deeply, deeply weary disappointment. "Mom," she said, her voice now a tight, strained whisper, all the false brightness gone, is that what you're wearing?" The question, so bald, so utterly devoid of any warmth or welcome, hung in the air between us. The chattering of the bridesmaids and the stylists faltered, then stopped. The room was suddenly uncomfortably silent. "It's a beautiful dress, Ava," I said, my voice quiet, my own smile feeling stiff and unnatural on my face. "I had it made." "You had it made?" she repeated, the words a small, horrified gasp. "By who? Is it a name? Is it a designer I would know?" Before I could answer, a man's voice, smooth as silk and dripping with a light, condescending amusement, cut in. "I think it's lovely, Ava. It has a charming simplicity." It was Tristan, her fiancé, emerging from an adjoining room. He was the very picture of old money elegance in his custom-tailored tuxedo. He walked over and gave me a kiss on the cheek. A cool, dry, and utterly meaningless gesture. His comment about my dress was not a compliment. It was a verdict. It was the kind of thing one says about a piece of folk art. A quaint, rustic object that is interesting but has no real value. Ava, desperate for her fiancé's approval, immediately latched onto his tone. "Simple is one word for it," she muttered under her breath, turning away to look at her own magnificent reflection in the mirror. The first cut had been made. It was not a loud, dramatic blow, but a small, sharp, and deeply personal incision. My own daughter on her wedding day had looked at me, at the mother who had given her everything, and had been ashamed. The pre-ceremony cocktail hour was a masterclass in the subtle, brutal art of social stratification. It was held on a sprawling, sun-drenched terrace overlooking the hotel's magnificent gardens. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of generational wealth. I stood alone for a few moments, a quiet island of emerald green in a sea of beige, cream, and tastefully muted pastels. I felt like an anthropologist observing the bizarre and deeply fascinating mating rituals of a foreign tribe. Eventually Ava, with Tristan in tow, came to perform the necessary and clearly dreaded duty of introducing me to her new in-laws. The Sterlings, Cecilia and Arthur, were a formidable couple. He was a tall, silver-haired man with the cold, appraising eyes of a man who has spent a lifetime acquiring companies and dismantling them for parts. She was a thin, brittle woman draped in a couture gown and a set of diamonds that were so large they looked like costume jewelry, but were, I knew, terrifyingly real. "Mother, father," Tristan said, his voice a smooth, practiced purr, "I'd like you to meet Ava's mother, Esther Williams." Cecilia's Sterling's eyes, the same cold, appraising eyes as her husband, swept over me in a single swift and deeply dismissive glance. Her gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on my simple, unbranded dress, and then on my modest pearl necklace. Then she did something that was more insulting than any overt comment could have ever been. She looked from my pearls to the ropes of flawless golf ball-sized diamonds that adorned her own neck, and she let out a small, almost inaudible and deeply, deeply amused laugh. It was a small private titter, a sound she shared with her husband, who responded with a tight, condescending smile of his own. The message was unmistakable. It was a silent, brutal, and perfectly executed act of social violence. "Look at this quaint, simple little woman," the laugh said. "Look at her pathetic little pearls. How charming, how common." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Esther," she said, her voice a cool, clipped, and utterly insincere murmur. She did not offer me her hand. "Ava has told us so much about you," Arthur Sterling added, his own voice a low, rumbling baritone that was used to commanding boardrooms. "She tells us you're in logistics." He said the word logistics as if it were a slightly embarrassing and vaguely unpleasant medical condition. "I own a trucking company." "Yes," I said, my own voice calm and clear, a quiet refusal to be intimidated. "Fascinating," he said, his tone making it clear that it was the least fascinating thing he had ever heard. And with that, they turned away, their duty done, their assessment made, and their dismissal absolute. I was not one of them. I did not belong. I was the rough, unpolished stone that had somehow found its way into their perfectly curated collection of flawless and very expensive gems. The subtle, class-based humiliation was no longer just a fear. It was a reality, and it was only just beginning. The reception was a continuation of the same quiet and relentless campaign of social humiliation. I was seated at a table far from the head table, a carefully chosen placement that was a public declaration of my own peripheral status. I was seated with a collection of distant, twice-removed Sterling cousins, who spoke of their horses and their summer homes in a language I did not understand. I endured it all with a quiet and increasingly fragile grace. I smiled. I ate the delicious and ridiculously expensive food. I watched my daughter, my beautiful, radiant, and utterly completely lost daughter, laugh and preen at the head table, the very picture of a woman who had finally and completely arrived. The moment of supreme and final betrayal arrived halfway through the main course. It happened, as most disasters do, in a moment of small, stupid, and entirely random chaos. A clumsy guest, a young, nervous-looking associate from Tristine's firm, was trying to navigate his way back to his table, his hands full with 2 glasses of red wine. He stumbled and the 2 glasses went flying, their dark ruby contents arcing through the air and landing with a devastating splash on the pristine white tablecloth of a table near the head table. A collective, horrified gasp went through the room. Tristan's mother, Cecilia Sterling, who was seated at the head table, a queen surveying her court, reacted with a sharp, panicked and deeply imperious cry. "Oh, for heaven's sake! Someone get the staff over here. Immediately, this is a disaster." She looked around, her eyes scanning the room for a waiter, for a busboy, for anyone in a uniform who could be summoned to clean up this ugly off-brand mess. Her gaze, in its frantic search, landed on me. I was standing near the edge of the dance floor, having just returned from the ladies' room. I was in my simple, unadorned dark green dress, the only person in the room not draped in glittering sequins, or pale celebratory silks. Cecilia turned to my daughter, her voice a sharp, commanding hiss that carried across the tables. "Ava, darling," she said, "is your mother with the hotel staff? She seems to be available. Can you ask her to handle this before it stains?" The room in that moment went completely, utterly silent. The band, which had been playing a soft, jazzy tune, faltered and stopped. Every eye in the room, which had been on the spilled wine, now swiveled to my daughter, waiting for her response. This was her moment of truth. A direct, public and unavoidable choice. She could defend her mother, she could with a simple horrified "of course not. Cecilia, that's my mother," put her new formidable mother-in-law in her place. Or she could complete her betrayal, she could choose her new family, her new status over the woman who had given her life. She did not hesitate. Ava looked at her mother-in-law, a bright, brittle and deeply, deeply sycophantic smile on her face. "Oh, don't worry about her, Cecilia," she said, her voice a light, airy and dismissive chime. "She's just with the staff." The words "she's just with the staff" hung in the air for a moment, a perfect, polished, and utterly monstrous jewel of a sentence. It was not just a dismissal, it was a recategorization of my entire existence. I was not a mother, not a guest, not a human being worthy of respect. I was a functionary, an employee, a nameless, faceless part of the service industry that made her perfect, beautiful life possible. Then the laughter. It was not a loud, boorish roar. It was something far worse. A wave of quiet, appreciative and deeply cruel laughter rippled through the head table, through the tables of the Sterling family's closest and most powerful friends. It was the laughter of a social class, of a tribe, closing ranks. They were not laughing at a joke, they were laughing at me. They were laughing at the perfect, witty and utterly ruthless way that the new bride had just put her common and clearly embarrassing mother in her place. It was a social execution, and they were applauding the skill of the executioner. The humiliation was complete, and it was devastatingly, soul-crushingly, public. I stood there, a few feet from their table, and I felt the heat of 100 pairs of eyes on me, some pitying, some curious, and some the ones from the Sterling's inner circle, openly, cruelly, amused. My face was burning, a hot, prickling wave of shame so intense it was almost physically painful. I wanted to do 1,000 things in that moment. I wanted to turn and flee. I wanted to walk over to my daughter and slap her beautiful, treacherous face. I wanted to scream, to weep, to shatter the perfect, glittering and soul-deadening facade of this entire monstrous event. But I did none of those things. Instead, a strange and profound and terrifying stillness came over me. The hurt, the rage, the profound and bottomless maternal grief. It all receded, replaced by a feeling I had not felt since the day my husband had died. A feeling of absolute and utter emotional detachment. The noise of the room, the laughter, the resumed chatter, the clinking of glasses faded into a distant, meaningless hum. The beautiful, glittering ballroom seemed to shrink, the people in it becoming small, insignificant, and two-dimensional like figures in a dollhouse. In that moment of perfect, terrible clarity, I saw my daughter not as my child but as a stranger, a cruel, ambitious, and deeply, deeply lost woman I no longer knew. The last vestiges of my maternal hope, the hope that she would see me, that she would defend me, that she still loved me, died in that moment. And in the cold, quiet, and empty space that was left behind, something new and hard, and as unyielding as granite began to form. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not move. I just stood there, my posture perfect, my face a calm, serene, and utterly blank mask, and I let them laugh. I let them finish humiliating me, because I knew with a sudden chilling and deeply, deeply satisfying certainty that I was the one who was about to have the last laugh. Across the grand, opulent ballroom, through the sea of laughing, indifferent faces, I caught his eye. Mr. Franklin Hayes, the distinguished, impeccably dressed, and fiercely loyal general manager of the Sterling Grand Hotel, was standing near the main entrance. He was a man in his 60s, with a mane of silver hair and the quiet, watchful, and deeply intelligent eyes of a man who has seen everything and has forgotten nothing. He had been a friend of my late husband, Joseph, and for the past 10 years he had been my most trusted and most discreet employee. He had been watching the entire ugly scene unfold, and his face, unlike the amused, condescending faces of the Sterling family, was a mask of horrified disbelief and profound, respectful sympathy, a sympathy that was directed, I knew, entirely at me. He was not just a hotel manager, watching a guest be mistreated. He was an ally, a loyal soldier watching his queen be publicly insulted by a group of arrogant and deeply, deeply ignorant usurpers. As our eyes met, he gave me a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a nod of pity. It was a nod of confirmation. It was a silent, powerful, and deeply understood communication. It was the signal we had, in our quiet, strategic planning for this day, agreed upon. The nod said, "I saw it. I heard it. The line has been crossed. Are we proceeding?" I held his gaze for a moment, and in my own eyes he saw not the face of a humiliated, broken woman, but the face of a CEO who has just had a final and deeply unsatisfactory negotiation. I gave him a nod of my own, a single sharp and utterly decisive dip of my chin. The nod said, "Yes, Franklin, we are proceeding. Prepare for the special announcement." He nodded back, another small, sharp, and deeply satisfying confirmation, and then, with a calm, deliberate, and almost invisible efficiency, he turned and disappeared into the hushed, velvet-draped corridors of my hotel. The silent confirmation, the quiet, secret communication between the true owner of the establishment and her loyal general manager, had taken less than 3 seconds. But in that small, silent exchange, the fate of the Sterling family, the fate of my daughter's beautiful, perfect, and now deeply, deeply compromised wedding, had been sealed. The plan, the quiet, devastating, and beautifully poetically just surprise I had prepared, was now officially in motion. The moment of high drama passed. The laughter died down. The staff, the real staff, appeared and, with a quiet, mortified efficiency, cleaned up the spilled wine. The band began to play again. The party, with its relentless, cheerful, and utterly soulless momentum, moved on. A few minutes later, Tristan, my new son-in-law, a man now officially and legally bound to the daughter who had just publicly disowned me, made his way over to my table. He was holding 2 glasses of champagne, a look of smooth, practiced, and deeply, deeply insincere apology on his handsome face. He sat down in the empty chair beside me. "Esther," he said, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "I am so sorry about that. My mother, she has a very dry, very old-school sense of humor. And Ava was just playing along, trying to keep the peace." He was not just apologizing, he was making excuses. He was reframing his mother's cruelty as humor, and my daughter's betrayal as an act of diplomatic grace. "I can't believe I have to say this," he continued, with a small, self-deprecating chuckle. "But please don't take it personally, Esther. The family, we're a bit of an acquired taste. It just takes a while to get used to how we do things in our world." The condescension in his voice was so profound, so absolute, it was almost a form of art. He was not just apologizing for the insult. He was explaining my own humiliation to me as if I were a slow, simple-minded child who could not possibly understand the sophisticated, nuanced social codes of his world. He was, in effect, telling me that the problem was not their cruelty but my inability to appreciate it. It was the final and most profound insult of the evening. I looked at him, at his handsome, charming, and utterly, completely morally bankrupt face, and I smiled. A small, quiet, and completely unreadable smile. "I see," is all I said. My quiet, simple acceptance seemed to reassure him. He believed his charm had worked. He believed he had successfully managed the situation, smoothed over the awkwardness, He patted my shoulder with a condescending warmth. "That's the spirit," he said. "Now drink your champagne, and try to enjoy the party. It's a hell of a party, isn't it?" "Yes, Tristan," I said, my smile still in place. "It certainly is." He stood up, satisfied, his duty as the gracious welcoming son-in-law complete, and made his way back to the head table, back to his world. I watched him go, and as I sat there, my champagne untouched, a cold, hard and deeply, deeply satisfying thought echoed in my mind. "You have no idea, you arrogant little boy," I thought. "You have no idea what a hell of a party this is about to become." I gave him 5 minutes. I let him get back to his table. Let him settle back into the warm, triumphant glow of his own perfect wedding. I let him believe that the small, unpleasant fire of my humiliation had been successfully and charmingly extinguished. Then, I quietly excused myself from my table. I did not go to the ladies' room. I walked with a calm, unhurried and deeply purposeful pace, out of the grand, noisy ballroom and into a secluded, quiet alcove near the main hotel lobby. It was a small, silent space, furnished with a single velvet armchair and a small, antique writing desk. It was a pocket of the old, quiet elegance of the hotel, a world away from the loud, modern chaos of the party. I took out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady. The emotional storm of the past hour had passed, leaving behind a cold, clear and absolute calm. I was no longer a grieving mother. I was no longer a humiliated guest. I was Esther Williams, the founder and CEO of a logistics empire, a woman who had spent a lifetime making difficult, decisive and highly consequential decisions. And I was about to make the final and most satisfying one of my career. I opened my text messages and found the number for my general manager, Franklin Hayes. My finger hovered over the screen for a moment. This was the point of no return. The moment the message was sent, a chain of events would be set in motion that could not be stopped. A chain of events that would publicly and irrevocably shatter my daughter's perfect new life. I thought of her face, of her bright, brittle and utterly dismissive smile as she had called me staff. I thought of the cruel, appreciative laughter of the Sterling family. I thought of my own quiet, lonely years of hard, bone-breaking work, the work that had paid for this very room, this very party, this very humiliation. And I typed a message. It was short, simple, and utterly devastatingly clear. "Franklin, the 5-minute warning. Prepare for the special announcement after the groom's toast. Execute Plan A." I pressed send. The small swoosh sound of the message leaving my phone was the quietest and most powerful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a silent and very final declaration of war. The plan was now in motion. The trap was set. I returned to my table, my face a mask of serene grandmotherly calm. No one seemed to have noticed my brief absence. The party, a great, glittering and soulless machine, turned on, oblivious to the quiet seismic shift that had just occurred. For the next hour I was not a participant. I was an anthropologist, a quiet, detached observer, studying the bizarre, cruel and deeply fascinating rituals of a foreign tribe. I listened to the conversations around me. It was a language of pure, unadulterated status. The women spoke of their children's acceptances into elite, Ivy League schools. The men spoke of their stock portfolios, of their latest multi-million-dollar acquisitions. They were not conversing, they were competing. Their words a constant, subtle and relentless jockeying for position in the social hierarchy. I watched my daughter. She was in her element. She moved from table to table, her laughter a little too loud, her smile a little too bright. She was a masterful performer, a brilliant actress in the play of her own life. She was happy, or rather she was performing a version of happiness that was so convincing she had likely come to believe it herself. I watched Tristan. He was the king of this court, his every word met with appreciative laughter. His every opinion treated as a profound and insightful pearl of wisdom. He was a man who had been born on third base and was convinced he had hit a triple. I endured it all with a quiet and increasingly chilling grace. I was a statue in the midst of a bacchanal. The food, which I knew was astronomically expensive, tasted like ash in my mouth. The music, a bland, inoffensive jazz that was designed to be ignored, was a grating, meaningless noise. My sister, who was sitting beside me, kept shooting me worried, questioning glances. "Are you okay, Essie?" she whispered, her hand on my arm. "I'm fine, Denise," I said, my voice a calm, even murmur. "I'm just observing." She knew me too well. She knew that my quietness was not a sign of sadness, but of a deep and gathering storm. She did not press, she just sat with me, a silent, supportive ally, waiting for the lightning to strike. And so, I endured the farce. I endured the empty conversations, the false laughter, the profound and soul-deep emptiness of this entire beautiful and utterly completely hollow event. I was a quiet, patient, and deeply, deeply underestimated predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And I knew, with a calm and deeply satisfying certainty, that the moment was coming very, very soon. As the dessert plates were cleared and fresh glasses of champagne were poured, the bandleader, a man with a smooth, professional smile and an air of practiced sincerity, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice a warm, smooth baritone that filled the grand ballroom. "It is now time for the wedding toasts." A wave of polite, expectant applause rippled through the room. This was the emotional centerpiece of the evening, the moment for heartfelt speeches and tearful tributes, or in this case for another round of public and very strategic brand building. The best man went first. A young, slick investment banker from Tristan's firm. His speech was a series of inside jokes about their college fraternity days, a testament to their shared privileged and deeply uninteresting history. The maid of honor, Ava's best friend, a woman who looked like a slightly less polished version of my daughter, gave a gushing, tearful speech that was more about her own feelings than about the bride and groom. Then Tristan's father, the formidable Arthur Sterling, stood up. He was a man who was used to commanding a room, and he took the stage with the easy, confident air of a king addressing his loyal subjects. His speech was not a toast to his son, it was a toast to himself, to his family, to the Sterling legacy. He spoke of the Sterling family's 100-year history in the city, of their contributions to its commerce, its culture, its very foundation. He spoke of their deep and almost proprietary connection to this very hotel, the Sterling Grand. "My grandfather," he declared, his voice booming with a deep, self-satisfied pride, "had his wedding reception in this very ballroom in 1948. My father had his here, in 1972. And tonight, my son, Tristan, continues that proud family tradition. This hotel is not just a building to us, it is a landmark of our family's heritage, a symbol of the Sterling legacy in this great city." He was not just giving a speech. He was claiming ownership, not just of the hotel but of the city's history itself. The arrogance was breathtaking, but it was also, I had to admit, a magnificent performance. He was a man who truly believed in his own, and his family's supreme importance. He concluded his speech with a toast to the happy couple, and to the merger of two great families. He did not, I noted with a grim internal smile, mention my name. The Williams family, the family of truckers and logisticians, was not in his mind a great family. We were a minor, and slightly embarrassing acquisition. As he sat down to a round of enthusiastic sycophantic applause, I knew my moment was coming. He had just spent 10 minutes talking about his family's legacy, their heritage, their deep historical connection to a hotel that he believed was in some spiritual, if not legal sense, his own. He had built the pedestal as high as it could possibly go. The fall was going to be magnificent. After the final perfunctory toast from the best man, the band leader, a man who was clearly following a very specific and unusual script for the evening, stepped back up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice once again a smooth professional purr, "that concludes our scheduled toasts for the evening. However, we have one final special announcement to be made." A small, curious murmur went through the room. This was not part of the standard wedding reception playbook. On the dais I could see the Sterlings look at each other with a mixture of confusion and a faint, pleased surprise. They clearly assumed this was a surprise tribute they had not been informed of. A special fawning acknowledgement of their own importance from their loyal and long-serving hotel staff. The house lights in the grand ballroom dimmed slightly, the spotlights on the stage intensifying, creating a sense of heightened drama, of focused, theatrical anticipation. And then, he walked onto the stage. It was Mr. Franklin Hayes, the distinguished silver-haired general manager of the Sterling Grand Hotel. He was in his full formal uniform, his posture erect, his face a mask of calm professional dignity. He moved with a quiet, commanding presence, a man who was completely and utterly at home on this stage. He walked to the center of the stage and took the microphone from the bandleader. He stood for a moment, his calm, intelligent eyes sweeping over the sea of wealthy, expectant faces, a silent, powerful command for their full and undivided attention. The Sterlings at the head table looked utterly baffled, but also faintly, smugly pleased. They clearly believed that their most senior and most loyal employee was about to deliver a gushing, heartfelt tribute to their family's long and storied history with the hotel. They were a family who believed in the old-world values of loyalty and deference from their staff, and they were about to be publicly rewarded for their own benevolent patronage. Ava, my daughter, looked equally confused, but a small, anxious smile played on her lips. Any surprise, as long as it was an expensive, high-status one, was a welcome addition to her perfect day. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. The room was now completely and utterly silent. 200 of the city's most powerful and influential people were holding their breath, waiting to see what this unexpected and highly unusual announcement could possibly be. The approach was complete. The final devastating act of the play was about to begin. Mr. Hayes did not look at the Sterling family. He did not offer them a nod of recognition or a smile of deference. He looked out at the entire assembled crowd, his gaze direct, professional, and deeply, deeply serious. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm, clear, and authoritative, the voice of a man who is used to being listened to, a man who is completely and utterly in charge. "My name is Franklin Hayes, and I have had the honor of serving as the general manager of this fine establishment, the Sterling Grand Hotel, for the past 15 years. He paused, letting his title, his position of authority, settle over the room. "I am here tonight," he continued, "at the request of a very special and very private individual. I am here to introduce a person whose vision, whose leadership, and whose quiet, unshakable integrity have been the true foundation of this hotel's success for the past decade." A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the room. This was not the speech they had been expecting. This was not a tribute to the Sterling family's legacy. This was something else entirely. I could see the pleased, expectant looks on the faces of Arthur and Cecilia Sterling begin to falter, replaced by a flicker of confused and deeply, deeply insulted annoyance. "The Sterling Grand is more than just a hotel," Mr. Hayes continued, his voice now ringing with a genuine, heartfelt passion. "It is an institution, and for the last 10 years, it has been under the stewardship of a woman who is not just a brilliant business leader but a titan of her industry, a woman who understands that true luxury is not about flash, but about substance, not about labels but about quality. A woman who is a great philanthropist, a quiet supporter of the arts, and I am deeply proud to say, my boss." He paused again, a final dramatic beat, before delivering the final devastating and utterly, completely world-altering line. He turned, and instead of gesturing to the head table where the Sterling family sat, a group of mere long-term guests, he gestured, with a deep and profoundly respectful inclination of his head, directly to my table in the center of the room. Directly to me. "So it is my profound honor and my deep personal pleasure," he announced, his voice booming with a triumphant and long overdue clarity, "to introduce to you all the true owner of this hotel, Miss Esther Williams." The moment Mr. Hayes said my name, the moment he identified me not as the staff, not as the common and embarrassing mother, but as the true owner of the very building they were all sitting in, a profound and deeply, deeply satisfying silence fell over the grand ballroom. It was not a quiet silence, it was a loud silence, a silence that was filled with the sound of 200 people's brains simultaneously and violently short-circuiting. And then, a single powerful and perfectly aimed spotlight, which Mr. Hayes had clearly arranged beforehand, hit me. It cut through the dim ambient light of the ballroom, isolating me, illuminating me, transforming me from an invisible peripheral figure into the undisputed and very bright center of the universe. The room was in a state of stunned, absolute, and almost comical paralysis. Ava and the entire Sterling family at the head table were frozen, their faces identical masks of utter, uncomprehending, slack-jawed shock. They were looking at me, at the woman in the simple dark green dress, the woman they had just laughed at, the woman my daughter had just dismissed as staff, and they were trying to reconcile that image with the words they had just heard. The true owner. I stood up, my movements were calm, unhurried, and deliberate. The adrenaline that had been a low, cold hum in my veins all night was now a warm, steadying current. I was not afraid. I was not nervous. I was, for the first time in a very long time, completely and utterly myself. I began to walk toward the stage. It was the longest and most satisfying walk of my life. The crowd of wealthy, powerful guests, who had so casually and so cruelly dismissed me just an hour before, parted from me like the Red Sea. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of awe, of confusion, and of a dawning, horrified understanding. I walked past tables of people whose names I did not know but who now, I was certain, would never ever forget my name. I walked past my daughter's table, I did not look at her. I did not need to. I could feel the heat of her horrified, uncomprehending gaze on me. I could feel the tectonic plates of her entire, carefully constructed world shifting and breaking beneath her feet. I walked to the stage, up the small set of stairs, and stood next to a beaming and deeply, deeply satisfied Mr. Hayes. The quiet walk was complete. I had arrived, and I was at long last about to speak. I took the microphone from Mr. Hayes's hand. It felt cool, solid, and powerful. I looked out at the sea of stunned, silent faces, at the room that was for all intents and purposes my room. "Thank you, Franklin," I said, my voice warm, gracious, and carrying to every corner of the now dead silent ballroom. "You are, as always, a master of the understated introduction." A small, nervous titter of laughter went through the crowd. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I then turned my calm, steady gaze to the head table, to the frozen waxwork-like figures of my daughter and her new, and now deeply, deeply compromised family. As the proud owner of the Sterling Grand Hotel, I began, my voice still quiet but now imbued with the unmistakable and long-absent authority of a CEO addressing her board of directors. I wanted to personally and officially congratulate the happy couple, my daughter Ava, and my new son-in-law Tristan. I let the words "my daughter" and "owner" hang in the air for a moment. A quiet, brutal, and deeply satisfying juxtaposition. I continued, my voice a model of serene, maternal grace. A wedding is a celebration of new beginnings. It is a day when a child, whom you have loved and supported your entire life, finally leaves the nest to build a new life, a new world, of their own. My eyes found my daughter's. She was staring at me, her face a pale, crumbling ruin of shock and dawning, abject horror. "And for years," I said, my voice now taking on a new and deeply personal note, "my daughter has wanted to be free, free of my world, free of my business, free of what she has always seen as the humble, and perhaps slightly embarrassing origins of our family's success." A low, shocked, and deeply scandalized murmur went through the crowd. This was not a wedding speech. This was a reckoning. "And so," I said, my voice now ringing with a final and liberating clarity, "I have decided to give her that freedom. I wanted to announce my wedding gift to her tonight." I paused, a final dramatic beat, and looked directly at my daughter. "My gift to you, Ava," I said, "is your independence, your complete and total independence." The announcement, the real announcement, was about to be made. "My wedding gift," I continued, my voice still quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of a final, irrevocable verdict, "is that I have decided to free myself. As a gift to my daughter on her wedding day, I am granting her her deepest wish. I am removing myself, and the shadow of my blue-collar world from her new elegant life, completely and utterly." I let that statement hang in the air for a moment. A beautiful, ambiguous, and deeply, deeply unsettling thing. I could see the confusion on the faces of the Sterling family, the flicker of a new and even more horrifying understanding in my daughter's eyes. "To that end," I announced, my voice now taking on the crisp, dispassionate tone of a CEO, announcing a major corporate restructuring. "I have this week finalized a deal to sell this hotel, the Sterling Grand, and my entire logistics and transport empire, Williams Worldwide, to an international hospitality and investment conglomerate. The deal, I am happy to report, was for a very, very satisfactory sum." A collective, audible gasp went through the room. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. The Sterling Grand, the landmark of their family heritage, the symbol of their 100-year history in the city, had been sold by the quiet, unassuming woman in the green dress, the woman they had just laughed at. I looked at the head table. The faces of the entire Sterling family had gone a pale, sickly bone white. They looked as if they had just seen a ghost. The ghost of their own, long-held and deeply arrogant, assumptions. The hotel, their legacy, the place they had treated as their own private clubhouse for generations, had just been sold out from under them, without their knowledge, without their consent. But the most beautiful and most devastating reaction was my daughter's. Ava's face had crumpled. The mask of the sophisticated, confident bride was gone, replaced by the raw, ugly, and deeply, deeply terrified face of a child who has just realized that the safety net she has always taken for an absolute, unshakable given, has just been, with a single quiet announcement, completely and utterly removed. "The deal closes at midnight tonight," I concluded, my voice a final quiet and deeply satisfying hammer blow. "The Sterling Grand is, as of this moment, no longer under my ownership. Its future and the future of my former company is now in the hands of others. The message was clear. The bank was closed. The trust fund was gone. The endless silent river of my wealth, the river that had fed her entire beautiful and utterly fraudulent life, had just and very publicly been damned. The faces of my new and now utterly irrelevant family were pale with a shock and a rage. They could not in this public forum express. My daughter was shattered, and I was, at long last, free. I placed the microphone down on its stand. The small metallic sound was the only thing that moved in the dead silent cavernous ballroom. The party was over. The performance was complete. I wish you both a wonderful life, I said, my gaze sweeping one last time over the head table, over the pale frozen faces of the Sterling family, and finally, settling on my daughter, a life that is truly and completely your own. I did not smile. I did not need to. My words were not a blessing. They were a curse. A curse of the one thing she had never had, and was now terrifyingly faced with complete and total self-sufficiency. I looked at her beautiful, ruined face, her eyes wide with a mixture of hatred, of fear, and of a dawning, abject horror. It was a final sad and deeply, deeply dismissive look. And then, I turned my back on her. I turned my back on the stage, on the party, on the entire glittering, soulless world she had chosen. I walked off the stage, my steps calm and unhurried. The crowd, which had been a frozen sea of stunned faces, parted from me once again. I did not walk back to my table. I walked with a quiet and unshakable dignity toward the grand main exit of the ballroom. I did not look back. I left my daughter, my new son-in-law, and their entire self-important clan in a state of absolute stunned and deeply, deeply satisfyingly public humiliation. I left them in the ruins of their own arrogance in a beautiful, expensive room that was, in a few short hours, no longer even a Sterling hotel. Mr. Hayes was waiting for me in the lobby. He had my coat. He did not speak. He just looked at me, a profound and deeply respectful admiration in his old wise eyes. He helped me with my coat, a simple final act of a loyal friend and employee. I walked out of the grand opulent hotel, my hotel for the last time. I walked out into the cool, clean and beautifully blessedly ordinary night air. The valet, his face a mask of awe and terror, practically sprinted to retrieve my car, not the Maybach, my old reliable 10-year-old Volvo. He held the door open for me, his hands trembling slightly. "Good night, Miss Williams," he said, his voice a reverent whisper. "Good night, Daniel," I said, using his name, seeing him for the first time as a person. I got into my simple, unassuming car. A queen abdicating a throne they never even knew she had. I started the engine, the familiar comforting rumble a sound of my real, authentic life. And I drove away, not into a future of loneliness, but into a future of profound and absolute freedom. I was no longer a mother, a CEO, a secret benefactor. I was just Esther, and for the first time in a very, very long time, that was more than enough.